They made a simple, fatal miscalculation. They thought my family could be scared. They believed sending 3 biker thugs onto my land was an act of intimidation. For them, it was an act of suicide. Because they had no idea who I was. And more importantly, they had no idea who my wife was. They thought they were the predators, but they had just cornered themselves with a man who was higher up the food chain than they could possibly imagine. Before this takedown begins, drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story of justice echoes. It was a perfect Tuesday afternoon in Oak Ridge Meadows, the kind of quiet day where the only sound is the buzzing of bees and the distant rumble of a lawnmower. That peace shattered the moment I pulled into my driveway, and my entire world went cold. My wife, Sarah, was backed against our old chicken coop. Her voice was steel, but I could see the tension coiled in her shoulders, the rigid set of her jaw. 3 bikers had her cornered, their patched leather vests and rumbling Harley engines projecting an aura of cheap, manufactured menace. One of them, a greasy specimen with yellowed teeth and a skull tattooed on his forearm, leaned into her personal space, grinning like a hyena. I killed the truck's engine, and the silence that followed was heavy and absolute. As I stepped out, every muscle fiber in my body remembered the weight of combat gear I hadn't worn in years. My boots crunched on the gravel, and the sound was like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. The leader, the one harassing my wife, spun toward me. "Show business," he barked, as if those 2 words were a magic incantation that gave him the right to stand on my land and terrorize my family. Sarah's eyes met mine across the driveway. They were fearless, but I saw the flicker of relief deep inside them. She is not a woman who scares easily. She has stood by me through things that would break most people. But 3 against 1 are odds no one should have to face alone. "You have 30 seconds to explain your presence," I said. My voice was low, steady, devoid of emotion. It was the kind of tone that always made rookies go silent back when I was training them, a tone that promised nothing but cold, hard consequences. The biker smirked, a flash of arrogance from a man who believed his size was a substitute for skill. "President Loretta doesn't like you ignoring her notices," he sneered. "Consider this a final encouragement." I almost laughed. Loretta, our HOA's self-appointed queen, had been spoiling for a war ever since I publicly dismantled her ridiculous and legally baseless rule proposals at the last community meeting. She had fined us for a chicken coop that predated the HOA itself by 50 years. She had threatened us over firewood stacks that weren't even in her jurisdiction, according to the county assessor's maps. And now, in a staggering display of stupidity, she had escalated to hiring muscle. Her mistake was thinking intimidation would work on me. I looked past him, my gaze sweeping over his 2 buddies, assessing them. They were big but slow, confident but undisciplined. 3 minutes, I told them, my voice flat and calm. "You have exactly 3 minutes to get on your bikes and get off my property, or you will regret not leaving when you had the chance." The leader sneered again, mistaking my restraint for weakness. He cracked his knuckles, a theatrical gesture of aggression, and took a deliberate step not toward me, but toward Sarah. That was his final, unforgivable mistake. If you're here for this brand of HOA justice, hammer that like and subscribe button, because the story is only going to get better. The air itself shifted the second that biker moved on my wife. My body reacted before my conscious mind gave the order. Years of muscle memory, of drilled and repeated violence from a life I had tried to leave behind, flashed to the surface as if it were yesterday. I closed the distance in what felt like a single heartbeat. I grabbed his outstretched wrist mid-motion, my fingers locking onto the radial nerve. I twisted, and used his own momentum to drive him face first into the gravel so hard the dust exploded around him. He made a choked, gurgling sound as the fight went out of him. His two buddies froze, their brains short-circuiting as they tried to process how their leader got folded in half by a man holding a half-full coffee mug in his other hand. "Next," I said evenly, without raising my voice. The second man, a lumbering giant, finally shook himself out of his stupor and swung. It was a wild, telegraphed punch that belonged in a bar brawl, not a real fight. I ducked under it with ease, hooked his arm, and used his own weight and forward momentum to launch him straight into the chicken coop fence. The structure groaned under the impact, and the hens erupted in a cacophony of squawking alarm bells. Through the flying feathers and dust, I saw Sarah actually smirk. The last one hesitated. He was still on his bike, revving the engine in a pathetic final attempt at intimidation, as if noise would suddenly work where fists had so spectacularly failed. I walked right up to him. He watched me come, his eyes wide with a fear he had probably never felt before. I grabbed the handlebars of his 500-pound machine and yanked. The bike toppled sideways, pinning his leg beneath a mountain of hot chrome and steel. He howled, a raw, pathetic sound of pain and surprise, kicking uselessly with his free leg. I crouched over him, my shadow falling across his face. "Tell your boss," I said quietly, my voice ablade in the sudden silence. "Next time she wants a message delivered, she better use the mail. Because if she ever sends men to threaten my wife again, I will not be sending them back in one piece." By now, the other two were scrambling to their feet, groaning, clutching shattered pride and blossoming bruises. They weren't threats anymore. They were just broken men begging me to stop. One of them actually stammered, his tough guy facade completely gone. "We didn't sign up for this, man. She said it was just a scare job. Please, we'll leave." I let them limp away, their engines sputtering as they gathered their broken leader and what little dignity they had left. Sarah came to stand beside me, brushing a piece of straw from her jeans. She glanced at her watch, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. 3 minutes, she said. To the second. Word of an ass-kicking travels fast in a small community. By that evening, HOA President Loretta was on my doorstep. Her face was crimson with fury, her expensive pearl necklace bouncing against her chest as she shrieked about assault, property damage, and the army of lawyers she was going to unleash upon me. But her hired thugs weren't filing any police reports. They had been too thoroughly and too professionally humiliated. Besides, they knew what I knew. I had every single second of their criminal trespass and intimidation recorded on my high-definition security cameras. I didn't argue with Loretta. I didn't raise my voice. I simply held up a tablet and hit play. I watched her face pale as she saw the footage of her hired goons cornering my wife. I saw her flinch as she watched me dismantle them one by one. I saw the pure, undiluted panic in her eyes as she realized her brilliant plan had backfired into a potential felony charge. Instead of a cowed homeowner, she now had 3 angry, humiliated bikers reconsidering their contract with her, and a hard drive full of video proof tying her directly to the crime. She came to my house to scream about assault. She left knowing I had the evidence to send her to prison. And I was just getting started. By the next HOA meeting a week later, the rumor mill was churning at full speed. People whispered in small groups about the bikers who had practically fled our neighborhood with their tails between their legs, about the undeniable footage I supposedly possessed, and about Loretta's unhinged role in all of it. I didn't deny a thing. In fact, I brought my laptop. As Loretta tried to call the meeting to order, I walked to the front of the room, hooked my computer into the community center's projector, and hit play. The room fell silent. There it was, projected 10 feet high for everyone to see. 3 thugs pulling up on their bikes, the greasy leader cornering my wife, and then me, dismantling them in under 3 minutes, my coffee mug still in hand the entire time. Gasps rippled through the room when the last man on the ground was heard begging me to stop, his voice cracking over the speakers. But the kill shot was the audio I had isolated and enhanced. In it, the leader was clearly heard saying the words that would end Loretta's reign. "President Loretta doesn't like you ignoring her notices." Loretta shot out of her chair, screeching, "That's taken out of context. That's illegal." But it was too late. Half the room was already recording the screen with their phones, creating dozens of copies of the evidence. A neighbor, a retired lawyer named Frank, stood up. He read directly from a printout in his hand. According to 18 U.S.C. Section 875, using interstate communications to threaten or extort is a federal crime. Furthermore, under our county's own ordinance on harassment, what we have just witnessed is a clear conspiracy to commit criminal intimidation, funded by our own HOA dues. The room erupted. Loretta hadn't just bent the rules. She had used our money to hire a criminal gang. She had turned the HOA into her personal mafia, and now everyone had the evidence. Her house of cards collapsed overnight. The bikers themselves, facing serious charges, cut a deal. 2 of them, bruised and humbled, walked into the sheriff's office the next day. They flipped on Loretta so fast it would make your head spin. They handed over text messages, payment receipts from the HOA's own bank account, even a handwritten note on official HOA letterhead where Loretta had promised them a cash bonus for the scare job. By the end of the week, a detective was at Loretta's front door with a warrant for her arrest. Conspiracy to commit harassment, misuse of HOA funds, witness intimidation. The list went on. She wailed about maintaining community standards and neighborhood safety as deputies walked her out of her immaculate home in handcuffs, a sight that brought her neighbors out onto their lawns. Sarah and I stood on our porch, coffee in my hand again. When the patrol car carrying Loretta rolled past, our neighbors waved, some of them clapped, and one of them, old Mr. Henderson from down the street, shouted, "Better send a letter next time, Loretta." The HOA board voted her out unanimously in an emergency session that very night. The reforms began immediately: full financial transparency, mandatory budget oversight, and a strict written ban on any enforcement action not explicitly backed by state and county law. But the best part, the most satisfying twist in the whole affair, came a few weeks later. The same 3 bikers who had come to terrorize my wife showed up at our driveway again. This time they weren't in leather vests. They were in work shirts, their hands empty. Their leader, the one I had introduced to our gravel, looked me in the eye. "Sir," he said, his voice quiet and respectful. "As part of our plea deal, we have to do community service. We were wondering if you and your wife, if there were any repairs around the neighborhood you needed help with. Fences, painting, whatever." They were humble, polite, and a lot less loud. I looked at Sarah, who just nodded with a small smile. I turned back to them. "As long as you understand the rules of this neighborhood now," I said, "I think we can get along just fine." Sometimes HOA presidents think they run a kingdom. Loretta thought she commanded an army. She forgot one simple, crucial thing. Some of us have been to war, and we know exactly how to win.